This is it. This is the one that I have been dying to show y'all because this is the reason you go with EVE-NG, especially EVE-NG Pro. This is how we can actually leverage Docker containers to run all sorts of additional features within EVE-NG. And here's the big spoiler. Here's the big secret. You can run any Docker container within EVE-NG. So by the end of this video, we'll understand the baked-in Docker containers that come with EVE-NG Pro that make it so amazing and so powerful, but then we'll actually pull down one of the Docker containers from the open web Docker Hub called OpenVAS, a vulnerability and assessment tool that I think is going to blow you away. This is not something that comes baked into EVE-NG, but EVE-NG is so powerful, we can pull it down and start using it immediately. Let's get going. I'm not kidding when I say that one of the #1 features, if not the #1 feature that made me go from EVE-NG Community to EVE-NG Pro is those Docker containers. And here's the kicker. EVE-NG Pro comes with some built-in Docker containers. We do have to run one command to install them though. Then I'll show you what those Docker containers can really do for you. But there's another real big catch that you'll really want to watch this video for the end. Here, look at me in the eyes right here, down here on the screen. You want to watch this because what EVE-NG can really do is it can pull any Docker container available on the Docker Hub down and use it within EVE-NG. And I'll show you an example of one by the end of this video, and I think you're going to realize, whoa, EVE-NG Pro and those Docker containers, that's worth it. Let's check it out. So I mentioned that the first thing that we have to do is we have to install EVE-NG. So using Secure CRT here, I've already got my EVE-NG environment ready to rock and roll so that I can SSH right in. But what you want to do using Secure CRT or PuTTY or whatever your SSH client is, you want to get SSH'd into EVE-NG's console. And it looks something like this. Now to get the EVE-NG Docker containers actually installed and up and running for us, all we have to do is give it a sudo apt install eve-ng-dockers. That's it. Apt install EVE-NG dockers. I'll press enter. And here's the thing. I already have it installed right here, the newest version. But when you press that button, it's going to go through all of the installation processes for you. Now, what did that really do? Just one command that runs some installations, but what is really going on under the hood? And what makes these Docker containers so valuable? How do we even use them in a topology? Let me show you that real quick. Jumping back into my EVE-NG environment, I'm just going to add a new lab real quick, and I'll call this Docker Demo. I'll save this, and we'll get started. From this Docker Demo, I'm going to add a couple nodes real quick onto my screen. The first one is going to be a router. So I'll just call this R1 and hit save. And the second one is going to be under Cisco IOL. I'm just going to add a switch. I'll call this switch 1. Beyond that, I'll actually change the logo here so that it actually, looks like a switch. How about that? Using the little Ethernet cable here, I'll just drag to connect these two together and click save. And when those two ready to rock and roll, I'm going to highlight them both, right click, and turn them on. Now, while those two images are coming to life, I want to show you some additional things that came with that Docker containers that we just installed. So if I right click and I add a node, now I see I have docker.io. So when I click on that, it gives me a few different types of Dockers that I can use, and you'll see them right here. This is the list where we choose the different containers that we can work with. And immediately your eyes should be drawn to that Wireshark going, hey, wait a minute, that's cool. That's Wireshark, like the actual Wireshark. Yep, that's right. I'm going to click save to add the Wireshark container here. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit this real quick to actually rename it to be Wireshark. And save. And I'll connect this into my switch. I'll right click one more time, add the node again, and go to docker.io. And now I'll change the drop down here where Wireshark was, and I'll choose Firefox. Yep, that's right. We can actually use Firefox. I'll change the name too. Firefox, we can actually have a built-in web browser functionality built into EVE-NG. So there we go. We'll do that. And arguably the coolest one, we'll add this node real quick. Under docker.io, choosing the dropdown, we'll choose the Gui Server. And I'll click save here to add that too. Oh, let me rename that real quick too. I'll call it Gui Server and save. And I'll drag that and connect it to the switch as well. One more thing I'm going to note before I turn these on, an astute observer who may be looking in the nodes here in Docker, if you click on this dropdown, you may have seen something called Ostinato here. I have a video dedicated to Ostinato that we're going to put in this playlist. Ostinato, what it does is it generates packets, but specific payloads of packets into your network, and it sends a stream of those packets in. So for instance, maybe you want to send a stream of SIP packets into your network to simulate a voice workload. That's what Ostinato does, and it's a bigger setup process, so I have a video dedicated to just working with Ostinato. So I'm going to click cancel here, and with all these 3 Docker containers set up and R1 and switch 1 up and running, I'm going to hold control, click on Firefox, the Gui server, and Wireshark, right click, and start. So these Docker containers start coming to life. And at this point, Firefox, the Gui server, and Wireshark should all be up and running. So let's see it in action. I'm going to click on Wireshark first, and it'll launch the Wireshark console just like this using Guacamole. We're going to leave this set to Ethernet and click OK. And do you see what's happening here? I now have Wireshark running contained within my environment. And that's really cool that I have a standalone Wireshark little application that I can run. But you know what's even cooler? Let me stop the capture here and exit out of this. Watch this. I can right click on R1, go down to capture, and choose the specific Ethernet interface that I want to capture on. And now it'll launch the Wireshark container, but already capturing a specific interface that I want to capture on. So what this is doing is when I click the OK button here, it's now running this capture directly on E00 on R1. That's one of the huge benefits to EVE-NG Pro is now I have a baked-in Wireshark container that I can use to capture any of the interfaces within my environment. The flip side goes for the switches over here. So maybe I want to capture E03 on my switch. Let me move this out of the way. I can jump to capture and E03. It launches a new container. I'll choose Ethernet, and there it goes. Now we're capturing on E03. Pretty fascinating, right? We can also talk about the Firefox instance here. Yep, there it is. There's a Firefox web browser contained within an environment. So as long as my Firefox browser has an IP address, it should be able to access any other web-based services that I'm running within my environment, or if I've bridged it out to the LAN. The last container we're going to talk about here is the Gui server. Let me bring this up and show you why this thing is so incredibly cool. Yeah, the reason why is because it's a Gui server. That's right. This is a full-blown Linux-based Gui server, and it comes with all of the amazing tools that you would absolutely expect with this. There's the terminal, there's Firefox. It comes with VLC media player, so you could actually do multicast labs. Ask me about that because I've done it before, and it's a blast to do. Text editors, it comes with OpenSSL, it's got Wireshark built into it, an RDP client, the Oracle WebStart client. Guess what that's for? That's for ASDM whenever you want to connect to your ASAs. There's Firefox, there's FileZilla for FTP transfers. Beyond that, this device itself is actually running Nginx as a web server. See? Look at that. I just browsed myself, and this machine is already running a web service within this environment. But here's the kicker. Without IP addresses, these Docker containers don't work very well. So what we need to do is we actually need to give them IP addresses. So real quick, what I'll do, just so that we can verify this is working, on R1, I'm going to give it an IP address on its E00 interface, and that way when I give the Gui server an IP address, it should be able to communicate through the switch straight through to the router. So let's go into config terminal, interface E00. Let's say IP address 10.0.1.255.255.255.0, no shut, and end. Copy, run, start just for fun. So now what I may want to have is I may want my Gui server to have the IP address 10.0.0.2, and that way it can communicate to the router. We could even set the Gui server to have the router be its default gateway too. So let's make that configuration come to life. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my Gui server off. That way we can adjust its configuration. The next time it boots up, it'll have the correct NIC configurations. Now that the Gui server's turned off, over here on the left-hand side, we're going to start messing with the Startup Configs section. So let's click on this, and this is where we can tell our devices they should boot up with a specific startup config. So here's my Gui server, and when I click on the Gui server, this is where I can paste or type in whatever config commands I wanted to run. So when I paste it in, you can kind of see the syntax and the commands that are going on here, but pause this if you want to type this in on your own. We've got IP address. We're adding an IP address 10.0.02/24 for the device Ethernet 0, and it has to be double piped to true. Then we're adding a default static route. This is going to be an IP route add. This is going to be our default route via R1, the router that we just created, 10.0.0.1, again, double piped to true. Now, if I also want to add the functionality to actually be able to do DNS resolution, I can type these 3 lines right here. You don't need these if you don't need DNS resolution, or if you want to change the DNS server, you can specify it here. But this is just for good measure so that you have, first of all, an IP address, then a default route, and then DNS services running. So with these typed in here, I'm going to click save. That saves the default command, but notice it's turned off for this particular server. So if I were to try to boot the server right now, it wouldn't boot with these configs. We have to click it to switch it to on, and now whenever this device turns on, it's going to boot from this default configuration. So let's close out of that, right-click on our GUI server, and click start. This time it should boot up with an IP address 10.0.0.2, and it should be able to ping its default gateway R1. Let's check it out. I'll go to System Tools and then Mate Terminal. I'll say IP ADDR, and I see the IP address right there, 10.0.0.2. If I give it a ping, 10.0.0.1, look at that. We've got round trip traffic going from my GUI server, now destined towards R1. Isn't that cool? These are the 3 containers that come with EVE-NG Pro whenever you run the apt install EVE-NG Dockers command. But didn't I say that there was more? There absolutely is. OpenVAS is a Docker container that's used for network vulnerability assessment and scanning. This is one of the most powerful open source vulnerability scanners and network monitoring tools that is in existence today, and it's been containerized by a few different people, most notably this AtomiCorp. So what we can do from our console into EVE-NG is we will simply run DC pull AtomiCorp/OpenVAS. I'll press enter, and it's going to take its time and do all the downloads and installations that it needs to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to let this run for a couple minutes while it gets done installing all of these items and come back to it when it's done. Check it out from the EVE-NG front end. All right, it's a big one, but we see it finally got done. This should have installed, it should have taken close to 1 gig or more to actually pull, download, and install OpenVAS. But now, let's see if we can actually just use this. Keep in mind, again, this wasn't something that was built for EVE-NG. This wasn't an apt install command. This was coming directly from Docker Hub. This is just any old Docker container that's out there in the world. And really what it comes down to, as long as it's got a telnet console, EVE-NG can pull it off the Docker Hub and use it. So now back in my environment, I'm going to go back to add a node. We're going to choose docker.io. And now I see OpenVAS is here. So let's call this OpenVAS and save. I'm going to drag this into switch 1, and just like before, oh no, my switch 1 has ran out of interfaces. Here, let's just delete Wireshark real quick. I could also shut down my switch and just add more interfaces to it, but this is just easier this way. So we see that we're going to be altering ETH0. So before we boot up OpenVAS, we need to make sure it has an IP address. We can do just like we did before with the startup configs. I'm going to go into the GUI server, copy this, go to OpenVAS and paste here. I'm going to change my IP address real quick to be 10.0.0.3 and save. I'm going to turn the startup config on and exit out. So at this point, we should be able to boot up OpenVAS. Let's let it boot. It may take several minutes for OpenVAS to come to life because, again, it is a very large container, usually cranking in around 1 gig or more. So give it about 10 minutes to come to life, and then we'll jump on that GUI server and see if we can access OpenVAS. So I've let it sit for a few minutes here. I'm kind of moving it around. Let's actually rescale this just for a second. You can see I've got OpenVAS up and running. The GUI server is up and running. Let's actually bring up my web browser here. I'm going to go to https://10.0.0.3/enter. Oh, so far it's giving me a self-signed certificate or error. Let's say advanced. Scroll down a hair, accept the risk and continue. Look at that. We are now prompted with the OpenVAS login. There you have it. You can actually pull down any Docker container that you want off of the public Docker Hub and bring it straight into EVE-NG. And as long as it's got basically like, a Linux console, a Telnet console, you can use it from the Telnet portal. Or maybe if it's exposing a web front end, we can use it that way. So there you have it. You've now seen Docker in action, and one of the biggest benefits of going with EVE-NG Pro. I hope you've now seen the benefit that I saw in it, and this was a no hesitation upgrade for me. So that's how you can get Docker containers up and running in your EVE-NG environment. Thanks for stopping by, y'all. I'll see you in the next one.